She thought a new life was waiting for her. But instead, the first man crushed her heart the moment he saw her. Montana Territory, September 1883. The air was dry and heavy with the smell of dust and horses as the train screeched to a halt at the small wooden station. People rushed about carrying luggage, children clung to their mothers, and cowboys leaned against posts with narrowed eyes. Amid all this noise and movement stepped down Clara, a young woman dressed in her best but worn-out dress, clutching a small suitcase to her chest. Her heart was racing with fear and hope at the same time. For weeks she had dreamed of this moment, imagining a man who would welcome her with a smile and give her the fresh start she longed for. But as her boots touched the rough ground, she felt the stares of strangers pressing against her, and a sudden wave of doubt rose inside her. Was she truly wanted here? Or was destiny about to test her in the cruelest way? Clara tightened her grip on the little suitcase as her eyes searched the crowd. Then finally, she saw him, the man who had written those letters filled with promises of a new beginning, a man who was supposed to change her life forever. Yet the moment his gaze landed on her, something inside her trembled, because instead of warmth, there was a sharp flicker of disappointment across his face. And before she could even take a single hopeful step toward him, his mouth twisted in disgust, his voice loud enough for every ear nearby to hear as he said with cruel finality, "You're too fat," and in that single instant the ground beneath her felt like it had disappeared. Her cheeks burned with shame as whispers spread through the bystanders. Merchants turned their heads, cowboys smirked, and even women pulled their children closer as if she carried some invisible curse. Her heart pounded painfully against her ribs. The dream she had stitched together with every mile of travel tore apart in front of strangers who would forget her by morning. But she would remember every second for the rest of her days. And though she tried to hold herself steady, her knees weakened under the weight of his rejection. She wanted to ask him why he had written those letters, why he had asked her to leave everything behind if he was only going to humiliate her. But her lips would not move. They stayed frozen while tears pressed against her eyes. And still he turned his back as if she were nothing more than a mistake that had arrived on the afternoon train. And with each step he took away from her, she felt pieces of her dignity scatter across the dusty wooden planks of the station. People looked at her not with kindness but with pity. And in that sea of strangers she stood alone, betrayed not only by a man she had trusted but by her own fragile hope. And though every instinct begged her to run, to escape the shame, her legs would not carry her anywhere. They remained planted like stone as voices around her cut deeper than any blade. She could hear the soft laughter of a group of young men mocking the sight, the low hiss of gossip spilling from lips of women, and the sting of silence from those who simply turned away as if her pain was too heavy to witness. Yet in that unbearable moment, Clara forced herself not to collapse. She told herself she had crossed hundreds of miles through endless plains. She had braved long nights of fear inside a rattling train. She had carried with her the strength to believe in love when others had mocked her. And if this man, this coward who chose cruelty over compassion, believed he had destroyed her, he was wrong. Because though her heart ached like a wound freshly cut, somewhere deep within her was a flicker that refused to go dark. A flicker that whispered maybe this was not the end, but only the beginning of a path she could not yet see. And while the world around her continued to hum with noise, in her chest silence grew, a silence of anger, sorrow, and the faintest thread of resilience that would carry her into a story she had not chosen, but one she was destined to live. Clara lowered her head and carried herself away from the stairs, her steps unsteady as she moved beyond the platform to the edge of the station, where the noise of travelers softened into the lonely creak of wood beneath her boots. And there she sank onto a rough bench, pressing the suitcase against her chest as though it could shield her from the cruel memory still burning in her ears, the humiliation of being dismissed like she was nothing more than a mistake too heavy for any man to love. Her eyes stung and blurred, yet she tried to keep the tears hidden behind lowered lashes. But the weight inside her chest was stronger than her will. Then slowly the tears slipped free, marking her face with silent trails of grief, and as she sat alone she felt the world rush past her as though she were invisible. Wagons rattled on dirt roads. Children laughed at nothing. Cowboys shouted across the street, and still she was frozen in a silence only she could hear. A silence where her dreams lay broken, scattered like ashes, and she whispered to herself that she should have never come, that every mile she had crossed was wasted, that the letters filled with promises were nothing but lies, and now she had no home to return to, no arms waiting to hold her, no one to tell her she mattered. Her stomach knotted with hunger, but her soul starved even more for kindness. And the cold wind brushing across her cheeks felt sharper than any blade because it reminded her she was alone, in a land that did not know her name. Her thoughts tangled in fear as she imagined nights without shelter, mornings without food, and days spent wandering with nothing to believe in. The suitcase on her lap felt heavier with every passing second, not because of the few clothes it carried, but because it held the last pieces of a hope she no longer trusted. And she clutched it tighter as if letting it go would mean surrendering the last proof of the woman she once was. Yet inside her, doubt grew like a storm, a voice telling her she was foolish for dreaming, foolish for believing in words written by a stranger, foolish for thinking she could be loved. And though she tried to push that voice away, it echoed louder with each moment she sat abandoned. And the whispers of the townspeople who had witnessed her rejection still lingered in her ears, replaying again and again until she wanted to scream, but no sound came. Only the ache of silence that cut deeper than their laughter. And in that hollow ache she wondered if she should gather what little strength she had and leave this place behind, or if she would remain on this bench until the world swallowed her completely. And though her body trembled with exhaustion, she stayed there unmoving, broken yet breathing, waiting for something, anything, that could prove her journey had not ended in nothing but shame. The shadows stretched long across the station yard as the evening light turned gold, and Clara sat with her hands clenched around the handle of her suitcase, her face pale with despair, when the sound of steady boots approached from behind and a voice, deep yet gentle, broke through her silence, asking if she was all right, and she lifted her head to see a man standing there, broad-shouldered, sunburnt from long days of work, his hat tilted against the fading glare, and though she tried to hide her tears, his eyes caught them instantly, not with judgment but with quiet concern, and for a moment she wanted to turn away, to push him back before he too could wound her. But something in the way he waited without forcing her to speak gave her a fragile thread of comfort. And then he set a small canteen beside her, saying she looked like she needed it more than he did. And though her pride urged her to refuse, her thirst betrayed her, and she took it, her trembling hands lifting the cool water to her lips. And with that first sip, she felt a flicker of life return to her weary body. And when she looked back at him, she noticed his gaze had not drifted to her shape, not once. Instead, it rested steady on her eyes as though he cared only for the sorrow behind them. And before she could stop herself, she whispered a soft thank you, her voice breaking, and he nodded, introducing himself as Samuel, a rancher from the outskirts of town who had come for supplies but could not walk past someone so clearly lost. And the kindness in his words cracked the wall of loneliness she had built around her heart. Yet fear still lingered inside her, fear that this man would pity her today only to turn cold tomorrow. And she searched his face for any trace of mockery, but found none, only patience. As if he had all the time in the world to let her decide whether to trust him. And when he offered her a place to rest, not with urgency but with quiet respect, she hesitated, her mind screaming warnings of false promises, yet her soul aching for a single moment of safety. And though every memory of rejection begged her to stay silent, she felt her lips form the word yes, a whisper barely carried by the wind, and at once Samuel extended his hand, rough with years of work yet steady as stone. And when Clara placed her fingers in his palm, she realized it was the first human touch since her journey began that carried no cruelty, no demand, no disappointment, only a calm strength that asked for nothing in return. And as he guided her away from the empty bench toward his waiting wagon, she glanced back at the station where her heart had broken hours earlier, and though pain still clung to her, the presence of this unexpected stranger carried with it a fragile spark of hope she had thought was gone forever. The wagon wheels rattled softly as Samuel led Clara away from the crowded station, and though uncertainty clung to her like a shadow, something inside whispered that she was stepping into a chapter far different from the one she had feared. And in the days that followed, his quiet ranch became her refuge, a place where the harsh sting of rejection slowly gave way to the gentle rhythm of life beneath the wide Montana sky. And each morning Samuel would rise before the sun, yet never failed to leave a plate of warm bread for her on the table, his way of speaking care without demanding anything in return. And as time stretched into weeks, he began showing her the land that had shaped him, guiding her across rolling fields where wildflowers swayed in the wind, pointing to distant mountains painted in shades of blue, and leading her to the corral where horses kicked up clouds of dust as they ran free, their power and grace stirring something long buried in her heart. And though she had arrived carrying nothing but sorrow, she found herself laughing at their restless energy, the sound of her own joy surprising her ears after so many days of silence. And Samuel noticed, his eyes softening with a quiet pride that needed no words, because he valued her spirit more than the world had ever taught her to believe it deserved. And in the evenings they would sit on the porch as the sky blazed orange and purple, talking not about the pain she had endured, but about simple things, the rhythm of seasons, the stubbornness of horses, the songs carried by coyotes at night. And with each conversation she felt lighter, not because he erased her past, but because he helped her see it no longer defined her worth. And for the first time she allowed herself to breathe without shame, to stand tall without shrinking under judgment, to move without fearing the laughter of strangers. And Samuel never once looked at her with the cold calculation of a man measuring her appearance. Instead, he saw the strength in her laughter, the kindness in her words, the resilience in her eyes. And as she worked beside him feeding chickens or gathering firewood, she realized she was not a burden as she had once been told. She was a partner in a life that was both hard and beautiful. And every moment she spent on that ranch rewrote the cruel memory of the station, until the woman who had once sat broken and humiliated began to fade into someone stronger, someone whose heart was healing in the presence of a man who saw her not as too much or too little, but as enough, exactly as she was. And as the wide land stretched endlessly before her, she understood that love could be quiet, steady, and real. And Samuel cherished her not for who he wanted her to be, but for who she already was. One quiet evening, as the sky turned crimson and the air filled with the scent of pine, Samuel stood beside Clara beneath the endless stretch of stars, his voice steady yet tender as he told her he loved her not for how she looked, but for who she truly was. And in that moment the weight she had carried for so long melted away, her heart trembling with a joy she never believed she would feel again. And the shadows of rejection that once haunted her were replaced with the light of belonging, for his words were not promises wrapped in lies, but truth born of every day they had shared. And tears welled in her eyes, yet this time they were tears of healing, because she knew she was no longer a woman abandoned at a station, but a soul finally seen, finally valued. And as she leaned into his embrace, she understood the rejection that once broke her had only cleared the path to the love she was destined to find, a love strong enough to last beyond the land, beyond the years, and into forever.